in aging studies. I studied aging studies at the University of South Florida in Tampa, where I was for about 15 years prior to relocating to Ithaca. And while there, I worked in the aging network with nonprofit organizations serving the older adult population for about 10 years prior to returning for a PhD. I want to thank you for having me. Especially, I want to say thanks to Marcia Capex and Sandy True for their invitation and generous support. And I want to share at the outset a few things. First, I developed this presentation specifically for this group. However, I would welcome the opportunity to share it with other groups. So please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I am eager to have the opportunity to refine and more widely disseminate my message here. My contact information is at the end of the PowerPoint presentation, which we likely will not get all the way through today. And that's fine. It's not if we don't get to the end, you don't get the culmination and the plot comes together. It's all just useful information, and we'll get through what we can. I don't want to feel rushed. And also, I want to mention that I provided a copy of the slides to Cheryl and Leslie immediately prior to this presentation. So if anyone wants a copy of the PowerPoint presentation, they can share it with you. I will also warn you that I have a highly needy cat and 2 teenagers whose last day of school was today in the house. So in our Zoom environment, I will inevitably have some interruptions and offer a blanket apology for that in advance. So with that, I think we'll launch into some myths and realities of aging. And I could literally come up with hundreds of myths of aging about which I could explore with you. I chose 9 of some of those that I encounter the most frequently in my work. Some that I'm most passionate about, but this just begins to scratch the surface. With that, we're going to start with one that is a particular pet peeve of mine, and which I find very relevant in my role as an educator of young people between the ages of roughly 18 to 25. And that is that anti-aging products can slow down or eliminate the physical signs of aging. This is the first myth that we're going to unpack. The term anti-aging is, in the grand scheme of things, relatively new, but the quest to remain soft and wrinkle-free skin is not a new thing. In fact, in 69 BCE in ancient Egypt, Cleopatra took daily baths in donkey milk to preserve her skin's beauty and vitality and to reduce wrinkles. In the 1500s, women placed raw meat on their faces, and in the 1700s, aged wine was a skincare regimen that was in favor. What existed, though, in the past as a fairly casual practice has become a really thriving and profitable consumer industry. As of 2020, the global market for anti-aging products is estimated at $52.5 billion a year and is projected to reach $83.2 billion a year by 2027. Women have been the primary target, but men are targeted also by fear-based ageist marketing and are increasingly pitched youth-oriented skincare products, supplements, and cures. In terms of debunking this myth, I was excited recently to come across a new episode of one of my favorite science podcasts, Science Versus. And this is in an hour-long podcast, really digs into the science that exists here. And if you were to listen to this podcast, some of the take-home messages that you would get include the fact that elastin and collagen are proteins that give our skin structure. And as we age, we do lose elastin and collagen, and that which remains loses some of its structure and function over time. In order to penetrate the skin's barrier, an anti-aging product's active ingredient, the molecules of that active ingredient must be fat soluble. This eliminates vitamin C as an active ingredient in a skincare product that will do any good because it is water soluble. And it also must be those molecules must be very tiny. This eliminates collagen, not tiny molecules, and hyaluronic acid, not tiny molecules, both of which are very prolifically marketed anti-aging products, but which don't even cross the skin's barrier and therefore do nothing in terms of impacting the appearance of our skin. Nonetheless, the bottles make bold claims, but the scientific evidence is just not there. The Federal Trade Commission investigated L'Oreal in 2014 and concluded that their claims were false or misleading. And even if we look at an anti-aging agent that can indeed pass the skin's barrier, that is, it's fat soluble, the molecules are teeny tiny, the one that's left is vitamin A. Vitamin A is known as retinol or tretinoin in its prescription variation. It is fat soluble, and the molecules are sufficiently small to penetrate the skin's barrier. Nonetheless, the science just does not support its broad effectiveness. Retinol, that is the over-the-counter version of vitamin A, as is marketed as an anti-aging product. A study of the effectiveness of retinol, a rigorous study, concluded that very little, if any, trustworthy evidence is available to support the use of retinol-containing products to improve the appearance of aged skin. And the lead investigator on this study concluded that it is, quote, a waste of time and money. Tretinoin, which is the prescription version of vitamin A, does appear to boost elastin and collagen. However, less than 10% of tretinoin users experienced even a modest improvement, and in those cases, only in the reduction of those very fine lines with no effect to the deeper lines, the things that we call wrinkles. So what are we to do? I argue that we can avoid smoking, we can wear sunscreen, and we can enjoy all the amazing trips we're able to go on with the money we would have spent on anti-aging moisturizers. The next myth of aging is a big one, and I'm not going to tackle it in its entirety, but we'll hit on some high points here. And this is that everyone follows the same general pattern of change and decline as they age. At the outset, I want to say age by itself is an extremely poor predictor of health. In her book, Ageism Unmasked, Dr. Tracy Gendron, who is a gerontological scholar and professor at Virginia Commonwealth University, reminds us that there is a difference between senescence and aging. Senescence is defined as the process of biological aging that leads to the gradual deterioration in the function in cells and or the organism. Aging, on the other hand, is the universal, lifelong, biological, psychological, social, and spiritual process of developing over time. Aging is dynamic, and it includes all processes, including loss, yes, but also growth, maintenance, and adaptation. Aging is multidimensional, it's multidirectional, it's universal, yet it's distinctive and unique to the individual. I'm reminded here of the phrase often used by geriatricians, medical doctors who specialize in working with older adults: if you've seen one 80-year-old, you've seen one 80-year-old. We are mortal beings, no doubt, and will all eventually decline and die. However, aging and dying are distinctly different processes, despite the fact that they're wrapped up in a lot of people's minds as we embrace so many of these myths of aging. Dying is gradually ceasing to exist or function. Aging is living, evolving, and growing. So classifying aging firmly within the biomedical framework as senescence, decline, degeneration, and death ignores the holistic and multidirectional paradox of aging and encourages pathologizing aging as a medical problem. Even if we are going to look primarily to health and medically oriented measures, there is still a tremendous amount of variability. So this figure, taken from a 2014 study, looked at health-related quality of life, here as indicated by the EQ5D, which is a commonly used measure that incorporates 5 dimensions of well-being: mobility, self-care, ability to perform usual activities, pain and discomfort, and anxiety and depression. And in this study, they found a significant proportion of the older population. As we see in this figure, it starts over here with females and males in the 51 to 54 age group, moving all the way over to females and males in the 85 plus population. Oops, sorry, I was doing that on the other screen, but hopefully you saw 51 to 54 females and males, 85 plus females and males. A significant proportion of the older adult population is living healthy and active lives at all ages, including those 85 and older. There is broad variation in health-related quality of life on the vertical axis here within every age group, not just the oldest old, with individuals in good and in poor health present at both ends of the age spectrum. Yes, the variance widens with age, meaning that we find the greatest heterogeneity or individual level difference among the 85 plus population, but different people appear to be experiencing widely different health trajectories with widely different health outcomes at the same ages. Overall, again, age is a very imprecise predictor of health status and related concomitant healthcare costs. Even if we are to break it down and look at health-related quality of life based on IADL and ADL status, we see wide variation. ADL's activities of daily living are those activities, many of you are probably familiar with these terms, those activities that are most fundamental to live independently, things like eating, dressing, bathing. Instrumental activities of daily living, or IADLs, are those things that are pretty important, but kind of next level, financial management, meal preparation, shopping, pet care, those sorts of things. And even if we break it down into groups, including older people not receiving any help, or receiving just IADL help, or ADL help, or receiving both, we see individual level differences, wide variance around the median here, and large individual level differences between these elders. As I said, though, aging is not just health-related quality of life. It's not just health-related. It is not all decline, and it's multidirectional, including decline and growth, and it's change. It's not all physical, it's multidimensional. So yes, we are likely to, most of us are likely to, for example, need reading glasses at some point in our lives. But we're also quite likely to be able to regulate our emotions better as we age. Our lived experience culminates to reduce the intensity of negative emotions and focus on feelings that promote happiness and calmness. Just one example of ways in which focusing only on the biomedical aspects of aging really misses the point here. Myth number 3, depression is a normal part of aging. In a 2015 study reported in the journal Generations, 15% of primary care physician respondents agreed with the statement, "It is normal to be depressed when you are old." I want to say that again. 15% of primary care physician respondents agreed that it is normal to be depressed when you are old. Imagine for a minute the difference in the kind of care you're going to get from a physician who believes it is normal to be depressed when you are old versus the kind of care you're going to get from a physician who knows that, in fact, it is not a normal part of aging. As people age, some may find themselves feeling isolated and alone, or have other experiences that can lead to feelings of depression, anxiety, or sadness. However, these feelings are not a normal part of the aging experience. Because of its devastating consequences, late life depression is an important public health problem. It's associated with increased risk of morbidity, increased risk of suicide, decreased physical, cognitive, and social functioning, greater self-neglect, and all of these things are in turn associated with greater risk of mortality. At the same time, and contrary to common perception, major depression appears to be less frequent among older people than at earlier ages. So let's take a look at that. In fact, studies show that older people are less likely to experience depression than young people. So in this graph, we see the highest rates of depression in the past year among young people, 12 to 17 and 18 to 25, followed by 26 to 34-year-olds, lower for 35 to 49-year-olds, and the lowest prevalence of past year depression in the US every year between 2015 and 2019 by age group, 50 plus. Depression among older adults is less common than other age groups. Less than 6% of people 50 plus experienced depression in the past year between 2015 and 2020. There are some key differences in rates between subgroups within the 50 plus population, certainly not a homogeneous group by any stretch of the imagination. So for example, the highest rates of depression among the 50 plus population occurring in residents of long-term care communities, with estimates ranging widely between 14 and 42% of nursing home residents experiencing depression. This is a really key area for further energies and inquiry and intervention, and something that a lot of people are working hard on. Another key distinction in discussions of depression in older adults is between those individuals who have already experienced depression earlier in life and those whose first encounter occurs in old age. It appears that about half of geriatric major depression represents a new condition arising in old age. This is called late onset depression, whereas the other half experienced their first episode of depression considerably before old age. This is called early onset of depression. Risk and protective factors for late life depression vary across time, as is illustrated here on the screen. The presentation of depression differs in older adults compared to younger adults. Older adults are less likely to endorse affective symptoms. These are symptoms related to our feelings, and they're more likely to display cognitive changes and somatic symptoms. These are symptoms related to our bodies, and less and loss of interest than our younger adults. So things like sleep disturbance, fatigue, psychomotor retardation, loss of appetite, agitation, loss of interest in living, and hopelessness about the future are more prevalent in late life depression than in depression in younger or middle-aged adults. Subjective complaints of poor memory and concentration are also more common among older people, as is slower cognitive processing speed and executive dysfunction. Depression in older adults is more common among those who have experienced stroke, Alzheimer's disease, and Parkinson's. And this can make its diagnosis exceptionally difficult due to overlapping symptoms and sometimes deficits in verbal expression and other sorts of barriers to effective diagnosis and then treatment. Factors leading to the development of late life depression likely comprise complex interactions of genetic vulnerabilities, cognitive vulnerabilities, and age-related associated neurobiological changes, with the particular types of stress or stressful events that occur more often in late life. A common pathway to depression for older people, regardless of whether predisposing risks are biological, psychological, or social, may be the curtailment of daily activities. And accompanying self-critical cognitions or thoughts or thinking may exacerbate and maintain a depressed state among older people, suggesting some important targets for intervention here. Age-related increases in psychological strengths. I'll say that again. We experience age-related increases in psychological strengths, and we experience reductions in psychological vulnerabilities, offset the prevalence of certain risk factors in late life. And other protective factors include things like higher education, socioeconomic status, good health and cognitive function, engagement in valued activities, and religious or spiritual involvement. All right, moving on. This next one we can dispose of quickly. This is not news to you likely, but news to many of the students who show up in my classrooms on the first day of an Introduction to Aging Studies course, who estimate guesses are in the range of 50 to 70% of older people live in long-term care facilities. That's what I hear in the classroom all the time. Less than 0.5% of the total US population, approximately 1.5 million older people, regardless of age, live in nursing homes in this country. And when we look only at the older adult population, as this graph shows data from the 2021 National Health and Aging Trends Study conducted at the University of Michigan, we see that the vast majority of older people, a whopping 93.5%, live in the community and not in retirement or senior housing, in residential care, or in nursing homes. Coming in at number 5 is the enduring notion that you can't teach an old dog new tricks. And we're going to look at this specifically as it relates to the use of technology here. But first, I want to unpack more generally this notion that you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Contrary to this popular saying, our brains continue to develop throughout and beyond middle age. Studies have established that not only can older adults learn new things, but that it's beneficial to make learning a lifelong pursuit. I'm not telling you anything you already know. Like stretching your muscles before you exercise, stretching your brain will keep it strong, flexible, and healthy. And some of this is just basic biology. The brain never stops growing, meaning that we are hardwired to get smarter as we get older. This also means that our skills, both soft and hard, to the extent that we continue practicing them, keep improving with age. Moreover, with time, we make more and stronger connections between the brain's two hemispheres, the left and the right hemisphere, meaning that age amplifies our ability to engage in lateral thinking. That is the technical term for our ability to make connections between farther flung ideas. The result of enhanced lateral thinking is far sharper problem-solving skills, far more accurate logical reasoning, and, if deployed properly, a significant boost in creativity. So we can teach an old dog new tricks, but let's look at it specific to technology. There's a broad misconception that older people and technology don't mix. This generalization is based on several presumed yet not actual truths, such as that older people are not interested in using technology, that they find technology to be unnecessary, and don't understand how to interact with technology. Generalizations that older adults are technologically incompetent disregard the complex biopsychosocial factors that contribute to the digital exclusion of older adults. These factors can include such things as visual and hearing changes, physical disabilities, speech-language difficulties, cognitive impairment, lack of familiarity with technology, and not owning devices. Here again, as we talked about before, age is not a particularly helpful predictor, as older adults with lower incomes who reside in remote or rural areas and who experience medical complexities face the greatest obstacles to using and accessing digital technology. It is true that some older people have reservations and challenges with technology. It is also true that some younger people have reservations and challenges with technology. And many older people adopt new technology willingly and excitingly. If we want to see ageism up close and at its most obvious, I suggest we look at the tech industry. A few years back at an event held at Stanford University, Mark Zuckerberg, Facebook's Mark Zuckerberg, told his audience, "I want to stress the importance of being young and technical. Young people are just smarter." This is coming from someone who, over the years and together with other tech industry leaders, has baked ageism into the very structure and culture of his industry. One way this occurs is through systematically excluding older people from the development, design, and marketing of new technologies. When it comes to internet use, virtually all adults 18 to 29 say they now use the internet, 99%. A similar share, 98% of 30 to 49-year-olds say the same, and 96% of 50 to 64-year-olds use the internet, compared with 75% of those 75 and older who report being internet users. In 2000, the gap between the oldest and youngest groups of adults in internet use was 56 percentage points. In 2000, 23 years ago. Today, the gap is 24 percentage points. Some of this has to do with disparities that exist unrelated to age. Again, rural residents, ability to afford an internet connection, etc. Something that I'm constantly reminding my students in the classroom is that older people are not digital natives. That's a term that itself is kind of fraught, but we didn't grow up using computers in our classrooms and in our homes. That fact alone does not make older people less capable of learning and adopting new technology, but it can explain why there's a steeper learning curve. Technology developers and trainers do not take this into account. In the Ithaca College Gerontology Institute right now, my colleague Karen Brown and I are conducting the Connecting Older Adults with Technology program, in which older adult participants meet weekly for one-on-one training sessions with a volunteer trained to work specifically with older learners. This program wraps up next week, and I'm preparing to conduct some focus groups and post-participation surveys with the coaches and the learners. But anecdotally, I can tell you that we're hearing that when their coaches take the time to explain at an appropriate pace, to stop and answer questions when they arise, to verify understanding before moving on to the next topic, and remain patient, that older adult participants are extremely capable of learning to use new technology, and they feel much more confident and less intimidated, and they're very pleased with the access to information and social connections that this kind of training opens up for them. After examining the literature, Gendron, the gerontological scholar and researcher I mentioned earlier, concludes that the majority of older people feel that technology makes a positive impact on society, but their lack of experience culminates in a scarcity of confidence in their ability to take up new gadgets and to navigate the online world. This lack of confidence is widely perceived as ineptitude, widening the perceived digital divide and perpetuating stereotypes and prejudices based on age. Despite the fact that older people make up a significant share of technology users, lingering stereotypes and structural impediments reinforce the misperception that they are not interested in digital technology, disempowering them as a group and provoking further exclusionary stigmatization. As a result, an interesting and cyclical phenomenon persists in which older people are left out of the research and development process for applications that are designed for older people, which in turn suppresses use and leads to further stigmatization when older people fail to adopt products, not because they're disinterested, but because they failed to address their intended but misguided attempts to help older people, but were created without older people's input and have contributed to ageist beliefs and behaviors. It is a bizarre merry-go-round, Gendron says. Here's another one that I hope I don't need to dispel for you, but for many people is a surprise. Exercise, the myth is that exercise isn't safe for older people. Though many people believe this, the opposite is actually true. Studies have shown that lack of physical activity raises your risk of obesity, heart disease, diabetes, the list goes on, and it can result in more doctor visits and hospitalizations. Today, the CDC recommendations for adults age 65 plus look very much like the CDC recommendations for adults of other ages and include recommendations of a minimum of 150 minutes per week of moderate intensity or 75 minutes per week of vigorous, intense activity, 2 days a week of strength training, and activities to improve balance. Another thing that I want to stress here is that it is never too late to start. Study after study after study demonstrate that starting exercise, even very, very late in life, is beneficial. So, for example, one study of medically vulnerable participants in their 90s who started in their 90s engaging in a 12-week program of twice weekly exercise sessions, balancing strength training and balance improving exercise, found that participants improved their strength, their power, and their muscle mass. They improved their walking speed, their ability to get out of a chair. They improved their balance. They reduced the incidence of falls, and they improved in muscle power and mass in their lower limbs. It is never too late to start. Next, cognitive decline and/or dementia is an inevitable part of aging. We could talk for hours and hours and hours just on this one myth, but for the purposes of today, I'm going to keep it short and sweet. I'm going to start with Dr. Robert Butler, who was a physician who we're going to come back to later in this talk, who has been hugely influential in the field. And we're going to go back all the way to when he was pursuing his residency in neuropsychiatry at the University of California, San Francisco in the 1950s. His work brought him to the attention of Dr. Seymour Ketty, who was the first scientific director of the National Institute of Mental Health. Ketty recruited Butler to join what would become a landmark research project on aging in Bethesda, Maryland. The project encompassed more than a decade 1955 to 1966, and has been described as, quote, the first interdisciplinary comprehensive longitudinal study of healthy community residing older adults. Earlier studies of aging involved ailing subjects residing in chronic disease hospitals and in nursing homes, and consequently, the results were inevitably skewed by the associated factors of disease that were at play. What the study proved beyond any doubt, remember this is between the mid-50s and the mid-60s, was that, quote, senility is not inevitable with aging, but is instead a consequence of disease. It is the case that our individual level risk of dementia does increase with age. However, the overall risk of dementia in our country and globally is decreasing. The percentage of older adults living with dementia declined from 10.6% in 2011 to 8% in 2019. Significant declines were observed for those in each age group, as broken down here on this slide, between 70-74 in 5-year cohorts all the way up to the 90+ population, and then taken together all ages. Significant declines were observed for those in each age group, ranging from 70-74 to 90+ between 2011 and 2019. Next myth, older workers are less desirable than younger workers. This is another one that I spend quite a bit of time in the introductory to aging studies classroom talking about. And I refer back to myth number 5 and what I talked about in regard to learning as we age, aka teaching an old dog new tricks, right? So as our brains grow, our skills improve, we embrace lateral thinking and more. And equally important is the fact that we gain emotional control with age. This is a big deal in terms of the workforce. Core business skills like persistence, resilience, focus, the ability to generate flow states, the list goes on, all require significant emotional control, something older adults have in spades compared to younger people. According to a study conducted at the Boston College Center for Retirement Research, the percentage of workers who are healthy, educated, and computer savvy are virtually the same for younger and older workers. And older workers care about their jobs as much as younger workers do. In addition, despite popular belief, they have goals and ambitions, and they are interested in taking on new challenges. Additionally, older workers stay with their employers longer on average, and this greater tenure produces several significant benefits to customers and therefore to employers. Workers tend to improve performance over time, a learning by doing effect. The longer we do something, the better we get at it. In addition, the longer a staff stays together, the better they work as a team. Employees with longer tenure develop a better understanding of the needs of their customers and have greater knowledge about the resources available to meet these needs. At the same time, customers are more willing to ask questions and seek assistance of employees they know and trust. Recent data from a large office supply retailer confirm the value of tenure. Stores with more long-tenured older employees have more satisfied customers, and stores with more satisfied customers have higher rates of profit growth. Even in areas like manufacturing, where the natural physical toll of aging might suggest a decline in job performance, older workers can maintain their productivity. For example, as is depicted here, a study of a Mercedes-Benz assembly facility suggests that workers can continue to perform well by improving on key metrics as they age. Specifically, the study found that older workers make far fewer severe errors on the assembly line. The body of evidence challenging ageist myths in the workplace is now deep and wide, but a few highlights. In one study of productivity and workplace diversity, researchers found that after factoring out machinery age in manufacturing establishments, productivity is no different in establishments with older workers versus younger workers. Another team concluded from a case study of employees working overtime at Navistar Incorporated, a manufacturer of heavy trucks and diesel engines, that adverse outcomes from overtime and indirect costs do not increase with advancing age in any kind of wholesale fashion. Another case study of a Days Inn call center revealed that considering just one measure of productivity, time spent per call, resulted in older workers appearing less productive, as they took longer on average to complete each call. However, measuring productivity as revenue generated revealed a positive association between age and productivity, because older workers in the call center brought in more revenue by booking more reservations than did younger workers. Take-home message: one of the best interventions to neutralize the impact of stereotypes of older workers and their internalization is to promote positive stereotypes by encouraging diversity on teams in the workplace based on age. Creating opportunities for people of different ages to work together and learn together is the single most cost-effective way to create an anti-aging workplace. Anti-ageist workplace, excuse me. And last but not least, and again, I could talk for hours about this, ageism is not really a big deal. I hear this, some version of this from people all the time. And when we look at the world, there are a lot of really important big deals, a lot of sources of inequity, a lot of sources of conflict. And for whatever reason, age doesn't seem to rise to the surface. And so people think, oh, ageism isn't really that big of a deal. And here again, I bring us back to Robert Butler, pictured here, the neuropsychiatrist who participated and led the first interdisciplinary study of healthy aging. He also was the founding director of the National Institute on Aging. He was the founding chair of the Department of Geriatrics and Adult Development at Mount Sinai, the first of its kind of its department in a U.S. medical school. And he won a Pulitzer Prize for his 1975 book, Why Survive Being Old in America. Butler says that he learned the simple truth about aging from his maternal grandparents who raised him on a chicken farm in South New Jersey, which is that life is what you make of it at whatever age. Butler coined the term ageism in 1968. Ageism, a term that refers to stereotyping and discrimination against people based on age. That term was coined by Butler in 1968 during an interview with the then fledgling Washington Post reporter Carl Bernstein. Coming back to Tracy Gendron, gerontology researcher and professor and author of Ageism Unmasked. She describes ageism as the shame-inducing, anxiety-producing, guilt-mongering force in our culture that is both everywhere and all but invisible. Advertisements and media tell us what to look like, how to feel, and what to value. Even those who are attuned to this might feel like they can avoid falling prey, but practically and psychologically, we are all susceptible to all pervasive meta-narratives in our culture. You might know that the latest look younger product is nothing more than snake oil, but your brain still does the equations. Younger equals good, older equals bad. The meaning we assign to being old and the concept of age identity is socially constructed. We create social constructs to help us make sense of the world, and they have a powerful influence on how we view people and how we interpret their behavior, including our own. We have an accepted understanding that old people are young and young people are two distinct and separate states of being, or that old and young are two distinct separate states of being. According to our social construct, young people are prone to act irresponsibly, even dangerously, but they're also attractive, vibrant, and looking forward to promising futures. Old people, on the other hand, are a homogeneous group comprising people who are frail, dependent, problematic, and fast on their way to becoming incompetent and irrelevant. These social constructions serve as a roadmap for the age-related behaviors we expect people to conform to. So we expect young people to take uncalculated risks, and we expect old people to be content quietly sitting in a rocking chair and watching the world go by. Truth for some, but not for all. There's nothing about the actual definition of young and old that points to value judgments or behavioral expectations. Old means having lived or existed for a long time. Young, a short time. Young and old age are not either good or bad states of being, they just are. The dominant cultural narrative represents the sum total of stories and messages that we receive from the media, cultural institutions, social networks, relationships, and these messages shape our understanding of the world and influence our self-conceptions in very insidious ways. Gendron encourages us to consider the following example of ageism. When John runs into Mary, he says, "Mary, so good to see you. You haven't aged a day since I saw you 10 years ago." Mary replies, "Thank you, John. What a nice thing to say. You just made my day." Okay, so we've run through quickly nine myths of aging that rose to the surface in my own thinking. And I'm not going to dig too deep into why it matters. Hopefully, you've begun to have some thoughts about that as you've listened to me talk. I do, though, want to just touch on some quick highlights. The reach and impacts of ageism are reflected in the extent to which we are surprised by the realities as opposed to the myths that we've discussed today. These myths that we've talked about persist because of ageism. Tracy Gendron summarizes the literature on why it matters in her book, Ageism Unmasked. And I want to highlight a few here and also mention that if you didn't hear me say it just before the presentation started, the Ithaca College Gerontology Institute is going to, in the coming academic year, offer to the community a community read of Tracy Gendron's book, and we'll make sure that Love Living at Home gets notice of those details. So why does ageism matter? Why is it important that we dispel these myths that are so prolific in our culture and move on to a narrative that reflects reality? Let's start with economics. Ageism is bad for business. Ageism is just bad for business. Joseph Coughlin, who is the director of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology Age Lab and teaches in the Department of Urban Studies and Planning, conducts research on the impact of global demographic change and technology trends on consumer behavior and business strategy. In this book, The Longevity Economy, highly recommend, he describes older people as a vast, diverse group of consumers representing every possible level of health and wealth, worth about $8 trillion in the United States alone and comprising the world's third largest economy after the United States and China. Coughlin argues that ageism means that older people are kept out of production roles, hindering their ability to make money and contribute to economic growth, and that due to ageism, industries systematically focus only on the safety and security needs of older adults. Think about the television commercials that we see, for example, such as assistive devices, alert systems, hearing aids, leaving a scarcity of products and services that focus on growth, well-being, and self-actualization for the same population. This figure shows the share of unemployed workers by age that have been unemployed for 27 weeks or longer. Remember that to be considered unemployed, someone has to be actively looking for work. This study supports Coughlin's claim that age-based workplace discrimination obstructs older workers from fulfilling their potential and creates a strain on economic growth. And with respect to ageism in business in the form of healthcare costs, we look at some recent work by Becca Levy, and this is huge. And here again, I could talk about this for hours, and I don't have hours. So I'm going to try to very briefly summarize. Levy and colleagues looked at costs related to 3 domains of ageism: age discrimination. These are measures which assessed how often participants experience a set of things based on their age, including things like you are treated with less courtesy or respect than other people. Negative age stereotypes. These are measures which ask participants to rate items on whether they are true, such as forgetfulness is a natural occurrence just from growing old. And negative self-perceptions of aging. These are measures which ask participants how much they agree with 5 items, including the older I get, the more useless I feel. They dichotomized the population into 2 groups, high and low, on each of these measures, and calculated the excess healthcare spending due to ageism for 8 of the 10 most expensive health conditions in the United States. The excess annual cost, 1 year we're talking about here, was $11.1 billion for age discrimination, $28.5 billion for negative age stereotypes, and $33.7 billion in 1 year for negative self-perceptions of aging. The total cost of ageism predictors after removing overlap between them for the 8 most expensive health conditions was $63 billion a year. This equates to 15.4% of overall healthcare spending. And among those age 60 and older, to calculate the number of health conditions due to ageism, they determined the number of people in the high ageism groups, as well as the difference in health condition rates for those in the low and high groups. And this was done for 8 of the most expensive health conditions, adjusting for age and sex. They concluded that more than 17 million cases of the 8 most expensive health conditions are due to ageism. This means that even 10% reduction in the prevalence of ageism could lead to 1.7 million fewer cases of the 8 most expensive health conditions in the United States every year. In summary, for each of the predictors and health conditions, the cost per person was significantly higher among those in the high ageism group compared to those in the low ageism group. Further, the prevalence of each health condition was significantly greater for the high than the low ageism group. And I'm going to run very quickly through a few health-related things, and then I'm going to stop talking. First, this is a report out of the Anticipatory Coping Everyday Study, or the ACED study, which was designed to assess the relationship between anticipatory coping and reactions to daily stressors. Participants completed a daily survey over 9 days, and what we see here is that more emotional reactions to stressors have been associated with higher levels of cardiovascular, what we see here is that individuals with more positive aging attitudes maintained a low level of negative affect across study days, regardless of stressors, whereas individuals with more negative aging attitudes had increased emotional reactivity to daily stressors. That increased emotional reactivity to daily stressors is strongly linked to cardiovascular reactivity and such impairments as atherosclerosis, among others. Here's an interesting one, going back to the work of Levy. Positive age beliefs are associated with resisting dementia. This is true for everyone, and it's true even for those with the APOE4 allele. That is the genetic composition that makes people genetically predisposed to dementia. Levy and colleagues found that dementia incidence was assessed over 4 years and adjusted for covariates among participants who were dementia-free at the beginning of the study, and found statistically significant differences between those with positive and negative age beliefs among participants, all participants, including those with the genetic predisposition to dementia. This was controlling for all other factors statistically, whether or not someone had negative or positive age beliefs, had a dramatic impact on whether or not they would develop dementia later, 4 years later. I'm not going to go into the details here, but also negative self-perceptions of aging lead to poorer self-rated health, decreased autonomy. Studies have found dramatic differences just in terms of if you prime older people with negative age stereotypes, they are more likely to report being lonely, less likely to take risks, show dramatically different and less functional help-seeking behavior, rate their subjective health lower, report that they are lower in extroversion and in self-esteem. And perhaps most intriguing, people with positive self-perceptions of aging live longer. If we can resist the myths of aging, if we can educate ourselves about the realities of aging and not succumb to the myths in our popular culture about what the aging experience is, we can live longer. This is the work of Becca Levy again, who examined in a longitudinal way a large group of older adults starting in 1975, and then looking at the National Death Index to see the impact on survival probability. Those with more positive aging, self-perceptions at baseline, controlling for all other factors statistically, lived longer by, on average, 7.6 years. Whoops. So that brings me to the end. In Ezra Klein podcast fashion, I want to end with some book recommendations. One is the Tracy Gendron Ageism Unmasked book that I referenced many times during this presentation, and the one which we'll be doing a community read on. The other is Breaking the Age Code by Becca Levy. I referenced Levy's work many times throughout this presentation. This is a really exceptional book if you haven't read it. And there are so many other good resources out there. But if you're interested in deconstructing some of these myths on your own, these are two really great places to start. And with that, I'll stop talking. I didn't obviously leave very much time for questions, but I am very happy to stick around if anybody wants to chat or to talk a little bit more, or if you have some questions, please do feel free to stick around and discuss. This is my contact information. I welcome hearing from people, and as I said, would love to meet with other groups. And thank you very much for your attention, and I'll stop talking now.
Thank you. It was very interesting.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
Are there opportunities for the people in the demographic you've been talking about locally to participate with the Gerontology Institute in some way, studies or something like that?
Yes, there are. And the best way that I can suggest that you connect with those opportunities is to sign up for our regular newsletter. I can provide an internet link to sign up for that digital newsletter to the leaders at Love Living at Home if you're not on it. We regularly promote activities that are happening, that are open to the community. And I'm also very open to ideas in terms of partnering with Love Living at Home moving forward. So please bring those ideas too.
Thank you for providing that link to. It's a newsletter we can sign up for. Is that right?
Correct. Yes.
Great. Okay. Yep. Thank you.
Of course.
I have a question.
Yes.
Hi, Liz.
Hi.
I missed a little bit of the beginning, but it's interesting. I've been in Love Living at Home since we started. I'm a retired professor from Cornell, but not in a social area, a hard science. But I've been writing a lot of grant proposals, and we've got a new foundation to us, and it's a relatively new foundation with oodles of money, and they're concentrating on older people, and the name of it is Next 50. So it's the next 50 years after 50. And one of their big things is ageism. And one of the things they've asked in your grant proposal is, how does what you do fight ageism? And I was able to say, by the very fact, and it really hits me over and over again, by the very fact that the people within who were members of LLH and many of the volunteers are older, and we run it.
Mm-hmm.
And we are the board, and we have an executive director who's a wee bit younger than we, but who's, getting into that. But it's older people for people, with older people.
Mm-hmm.
And it is, it keeps everyone younger, because we're all, we're together, friendly together, but we're also doing things. We're using our brains, we're, whatever. And so it's kind of fun to have you underscore what I've been writing, even though, as I say, my chemistry background didn't get me here, but just general knowledge.
Yes, absolutely. And that is a growing trend and emphasis of making sure that older voices are represented in the leadership of and the executive functioning of organizations that serve older people. I first encountered this when my husband was decades ago was involved with the Alzheimer's Association in Pinellas County as their policy director, and the organization insisted that individuals with Alzheimer's disease serve on their board of directors and have a very active voice in the creation of programs and policies for people who are living with dementia. And that is a growing trend, and I think one which is increasingly recognized as something that is actively fighting ageism as it exists in our culture. Kevin, I see your hand up.
Yes, I have a question. Is there anything like a co-housing program in New York? I know Vermont is pretty active, and I know especially in my area, there's a lot of seniors living one person in a 4-bedroom home.
Yeah, that's a good question, and not a question on which I am a particular expert. I will say that locally, I am not aware. I am aware of some initiatives over the years that never really sort of gained steam in terms of co-housing, but something that I think that we would really benefit from. But there aren't any that I'm aware of that are widely recognized and ongoing.
There's a small group within Love Living at Home that's pursuing that. I'm not in that group, but
Excellent.
Thank you. I'll track them down.
Great. Robin, I see your hand up.
Yes. You talked about the differences in how primary care physicians may view aging, and that there were a certain small group that may be somewhat ageist. The question I have is, if you were interviewing a new doctor, what would be the question that you would ask that doctor that would give you a hint on how they viewed you as an aging person?
Oh, that's an excellent question, and one that I fully expect to keep me awake at 3 o'clock in the morning on many nights moving forward. I mean, generally, I would ask about, well, first, I would ask about any training that they have in aging-related issues. I have asked that question of physicians in the past, and I find that it's something that they are often eager to talk about if asked, and eager to identify as having received very little, if any, training in the aging process, and to identify it as a real gap in their training. And then I would ask what what their professional experience, sort of post medical school, has taught them about aging, and how it is related to or separate from disease.
Ah, okay.
Those are places that I might start, although I'll come up with several others as soon as we end this call.
Oh, okay. I'm going to be doing that, so I wanted to have your advice.
Yeah.
If you do come up with several others, would you share that with Cheryl?
Please
So
do,
she can-
yes.
Yeah, of course. And I know that there's also very good, there is work that has been done in this area. And so I'll see what else is out there and provide some links to some other resources as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Other questions? I hate anybody who needs or wants to. I think we were scheduled to go until 3, so anyone who needs to go may of course do that. I just really appreciate your sharing your time. Of
May
course.
I just say one thing in
Yes.
reference to what Kevin asked you about the co-housing? Kevin,
Yes.
if you're still on, ask Cheryl to provide you with the information about the people, the group that has been studying housing options, including co-housing in the area, LLH members who have been studying that. So ask Cheryl for the names of those people.
Okay, thanks a lot. I definitely will.
Okay.
Yeah. There are some good examples of most often sort of larger cities where co-housing programs have been started and have been extremely successful, particularly in college towns where there's a large number of students, graduate students, and folks who are looking for housing, and older people who maybe have more housing than they know what to do with, that they would be willing to share in the expense of.
Can I be heard now?
Yes.
Sorry, I'm not on the screen. I'm not a good example of your point about ageism and not being able to use technology.
You are on the screen.
Yeah, you are on the screen. We see you.
Oh, okay, then that double makes my point.
So there's my
but-
point of lacking confidence, right?
But I do have a question. With respect to the cost of ageism that you so effectively showed us, I'm wondering, did that take into account the possible costs to younger people who, for example, might lose jobs to older people, or any of the psychological effects for younger people when they see, for example, 80-year-old presidents of the U.S. and the coming election problem. So I guess I'm just wondering how accurate those numbers might be.
Yeah, so there's a lot there, and we could go back and talk about each individual study, sort of, and how they were conducted and how it worked. In many respects, efforts were made, yes, to control for those sorts of things, depending on the analysis that was being conducted. But that's a really difficult thing to do, and so done less well or more well, depending on which study we're looking at. In terms of, you mentioned, for example, the upcoming presidential election, et cetera. And I really feel strongly that efforts to combat the narratives around sort of ageism or aging and dementia being inevitably linked, and aging as completely a process of decline, to the extent that we can correct those, we can minimize the psychological and other impact on younger people as well, and allow them to see the reality as opposed to the myth. I'm not sure I'm totally getting at your question, but it's a very good one. Absolutely.
Thank you. And my final point is, this is terrific. Thank you. And
Of course.
thank your kids for not getting in the way while you spoke to us.
I will pass that on to them.
Good.
Thank you very much. And
Elizabeth,
yeah.
can I ask one follow-up question? That was my
Sure.
husband who's asked, and so as always, I chime in. I did not read the article, but you keep seeing recent titles of articles about how Gen Zs or whatever the generations below the boomers are struggling and retirees are living it up. And then the idea that I think Rob proposed was the idea that these 80-year-old politicians, when are they going to move over? And how much does resentment play into ageism, I guess, is a general question at this stage.
I think resentment plays a huge part of it, and I think we can thank COVID for exacerbating that quite a bit. Absolutely, and you know, to take it a little bit further, I really reject the notion of generations just as a tool to describe people. I mean, think about older people, right? Think about baby boomers, it's an incredibly diverse group of people. One cannot know anything about a baby boomer by going by the sort of descriptions of boomers that is provided in the media or anywhere else. And I think the same is true of any other generation. There is more intergroup difference and variability than there is between group difference and variability in every case. And so I think that just reducing it to generations, Gen Z, millennials, Gen X, as I am, et cetera, just not particularly useful, and perpetuating ageist notions and overgeneralizations about people based on age. And if we think we have seen anything in terms of ageism as it applies to the pending presidential election, we've got another thing coming, and it is already bad. It's bad. All right. On that note, I promised my kids a hike at 3:30, so I should sign off here and let you all have the rest of your day back. So thanks so much for your time. I appreciate it, and I look forward to crossing paths with many of you in the future.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you very
Take
much.
care, everyone.
That you did it.